Hello, y'all. Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for your patience as we got set up. My name is Michaela Arciaga. I'm the Georgia Director of Advocacy for IDRA. We convene the Georgia Coalition for Education Justice, and we are steering committee members of Fund Georgia's Future. We are holding this press conference to share the perspectives of students, educators, parents, and advocates on the continued effort to privatize our public school system in Georgia with the signing of SB 233. As you just saw, Senate Bill 233 was signed into law this afternoon. This bill will divert much needed public resources away from our state's 1.7 million public school students in order to cover private school tuition and other expenses for a small select few. We're here because we oppose the substance of this bill, because we oppose the deliberate exclusion of diverse Georgians from the policy process. We're here because the public was not given the chance to weigh in on a bill that went from 15 pages to 40 pages overnight. We're here because education practitioners and policy experts had less than 4 hours to review and read the new bill before it was heard and voted on in committee. We're here because our state leadership claimed to have invested more than ever before in our education system, but have continuously shifted the burden of funding education from the state onto our local districts. And we're here because of the continued degradation of the democratic process that advances policies which are not only deeply unpopular throughout our communities, but will actively harm our students and families in Georgia. We're here because our state leadership still refuse to tackle the specific challenges faced by our districts educating students who are living in poverty, despite the widespread call for investment in those systems. We've shared extensively our concerns about how voucher programs, particularly the Promise Scholarship outlined in SB 233, are not the investment that is needed to serve our most vulnerable students. We've seen that vouchers don't significantly improve student academic performance. We've seen these programs lead to ballooning costs and mismanagement and abuse in our neighboring states. And then we've seen how students and families from historically excluded backgrounds and communities do not have their needs met by the private institutions that benefit from vouchers. We don't want you to just take our word for it. We are an organization that takes pride in centering the voices of those who are most deeply impacted by these policy, and we want you to hear from those voices directly. Our only ask is that you hold any questions until all of our speakers have finished, and we will give plenty of time to make sure that you can address any questions you may have with our speakers. Our first speaker is Elijah Braun. Elijah is a native of Troup County and is currently a student at the Emory School of Divinity.
Hey there, I'm Eli, Elijah Bronner, whatever. I was at the Capitol on the day that this bill was passed. I was watching the votes come in. I was also watching as myself and several other young people who had come up there, products of Georgia Public Schools as I am, came up there to tell these representatives, tell these legislators what it is that we wanted done. Now we sat on the ropes. We went person to person. We went individual conversations trying to convince these legislators, telling them what people who are from Georgia have to say. I also watched as very well-funded out-of-state donors and lobbyists came up to the rope, and I watched as the bill was passed on the basis of who could throw the most money behind it and not who it would actually benefit. Now, folks, I have experience with both public and private schools, and I can tell you that private school access in many communities is not something that a lot of people have. I myself am a man of faith, and every private school in my area where I'm from happens to be a Christian school. Now, this doesn't exclude me, but it does exclude our neighbors of diverse faiths. So if you can get a public school voucher and that lets you leave your supposedly terrible public schools and take your money with you, first of all, the voucher doesn't cover the whole tuition. So now you're only letting people come through who can already afford to pay partial tuition. So you're subsidizing students above a certain income level, and you're not subsidizing any students that are of a diverse faith background. This is something that's very important in our increasingly pluralistic society, to have these diverse connections. Another thing that I have to emphasize here, you end up having public schools with poor students who then have to subsidize the tuition of rich students, the tuition which is not equally subsidized on the behalf of the poor students. Now, this is by no means legislative language, but I want to make this connection to anybody who's listening. If you remember back to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says that a woman with 10 coins who gives one has given more than a man with 1,000 who gives one. We're asking for our poor students to give their last coin so that somebody with 1,000 doesn't have to give one. This is absurd. It's anti-democratic, and I'm going to be frank with you. I can't believe I'm seeing it. That's all I've got to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elijah. I hope that highlights for folks that this is not a purely theocratic issue, theological issue, political issue. Our next speaker is Fred Jones. He is the Senior Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Southern Education Foundation. He's also a public school parent based in Richmond County in Augusta.
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you, Idra, for hosting this opportunity for the public to voice its opposition to SB 233. I would like to say, as Michaela mentioned, my name is Fred Jones. I work at the Southern Education Foundation, and most importantly, I'm a parent of two. One, my youngest is a preschooler, and my other child is in kindergarten, enrolled in attending public schools in Richmond County. I want to highlight three things today because I'm very disappointed with the legislature and our state leaders' insistence to pass this legislation over the past few years, especially. The first is there is still no wide-scale data that shows that students are better off from an academic achievement standpoint with the use of vouchers. There's no data. Vouchers have been around, or at least studied, for the last 35 years, and there's still not one third-party evaluation that shows that students are better off academically with the use of vouchers. And in fact, the latest data from about 2 years ago shows that at best, these vouchers are neutral and sometimes harm students. You don't get the same resources. Students with disabilities oftentimes have to give up their civil rights in order to use a voucher. And then the academic achievement level is not higher than those in the public schools. And so if you compare and you control for the types of students who receive a voucher compared to those who are entering the public school system, on average, students are the same or perform the same on assessments. So our insistence on creating the system, which actually is not benefiting anyone who uses the voucher from an academic standpoint. Two, I want to make sure that there's a clear link about the origins of vouchers across this country and also the development of vouchers in Georgia. So in 1961, the first voucher was created by our legislature. And this was in direct response to Brown versus Board, or the thought that essentially schools would have to integrate. And so there was a public system at that same point, a public program to create vouchers so families who did not want to integrate can have a safety net in terms of funding to go to private schools. So we have this checkered history in terms of how vouchers started. And today, I don't think anyone would espouse the fact that we want to continue to desegregate schools. However, the facts remain that the private school population today and vouchers across this country continue to promote racial isolation and also discrimination as well. So I think it's typically is a policy in which is rooted in really racism, and we're continuing to purport that today. And I think the third thing I would just like to highlight is the fact that this system actually wastes taxpayers' money. We have a dual system that's showing that it isn't actually achieving. And we know what works in our public school system today. I would rather our focus and public dollars be channeled into effective programs like early childhood education or teacher professional development, personalized learning, or even high dosage tutoring. All these items actually show a difference and improve academic achievement rather than trying to develop a system that we know just doesn't work. So with that, I'll come to a close, but I do hope that we can continue to find ways to strengthen the public school system rather than continuing to divert money into ineffective programs.
Thank you so much, Fred. Our next speaker is Tracy Nance. Tracy is a teacher at both the elementary and collegiate levels and is the 2020-2021 Georgia Teacher of the Year. She is also a public school parent.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I am a Georgia born and raised parent, an elementary and college educator with an extensive background in sociology, and I'm the 2020 and 2021 Georgia Teacher of the Year. In 2021, I also served as an ex officio member of the Georgia State School Board. For 27 months, I traveled the state answering requests for keynotes and workshops on educational equity and teacher impact. These requests came from the Georgia Department of Education, Georgia's education professional organizations, as well as school districts across the state. And the truth is, the vast majority of Georgia's parents and educators have repeatedly rejected school vouchers because they see the increased inequity and harm that school vouchers cultivate. And the same is true of this year. The difference is that in 2024, state legislators chose to ignore the public's concerns, choosing politics over sound policy. Labeling the state's schools performing in the bottom 25% as failing is a convenient but very telling way of diverting desperately needed public school funds from Georgia's schools and students who most need increased academic choice and support. How do we give this bottom 25% increased choice and support? By choosing them, by investing more resources into them, not fewer. I have seen firsthand the incredible impact of what happens when families of many different backgrounds choose to support their neighborhood public school. Atlanta Public Schools Burgess-Peterson Academy was not always high performing, but families moving into the neighborhood chose to be a part of the solution, and it worked. The same things that make any great school great is true for our lowest performing schools as well. And what is that? Strong, transparent leadership that is held accountable, investing in teacher professional development, and absolutely making inclusivity a cornerstone of that school. And furthermore, it's partnering with our parents. The private schools that accept these publicly funded vouchers are not held to the same standards as public schools, and they are in fact even legally allowed to discriminate. They have little oversight. Students will not be required to take the same accountability test as the rest of Georgia students. They will not be held to the same instructional standards. Even more, when parents use this voucher, they waive all rights to federal protections and public education services, including services for students with disabilities and services such as transportation and school meals. And even more, these private schools accepting public school vouchers will be able to discriminate against students of many diverse backgrounds. Even more telling of the intent of Georgia school vouchers are the income requirements. The version approved removes prioritizing economically disadvantaged families. Families at 400% of the federal poverty level are allowed to divert public school funds for private school tuition, even as families at 101% of the federal poverty level are denied a free school lunch. Let me put that into perspective for you. In the current school year, a family of 4 earning more than $39,000, they're denied a free school lunch. And this is true, whereas families accepting this voucher, those families can earn, a family of 4, they can earn as much as $156,000 and still be able to accept $6,500 per child for private school. The truth is, the families this voucher will help already have school choice by the zip code that they choose to live in addition to an abundance of charter school options that are available. With this law, able families will be able to build that McMansion in an impoverished neighborhood and deny the neighborhood public school all of these beautiful resources that make a great school. And that is what's sad today, particularly when we know that Georgia's parents, educators, and community members do not agree with this voucher.
Tracy, thank you so much. I think highlighting some of the ripple effects in policy and housing injustice that can result from these kinds of policies is really important and under emphasized point of this bill. Our next speaker I have the pleasure of introducing is Daniela Rodriguez. Daniela is the Executive Director of Migrant Equity Southeast, MESE. MESE has been a leader in advocating for educational and access and opportunity for multicultural families across Georgia, particularly in rural and coastal Georgia.
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is, hello everyone, my name is Daniela Rodriguez and I am the Executive Director of Migrant Equity Southeast. But I'm also the product of the Georgia Public School System. I actually graduated from Glynn County Public School System in 2013. I know, a long time ago. But during this time, I was also an ESOL student. So ESOL, for those who don't know, ESOL is English to speakers of other languages. One thing that I would say is that I would not be where I am today if it wasn't because of the resources that were given to me as an ESOL student back in the day when I was a student of the public school system. Today, another thing that I would like to raise is that I'm also very disappointed at Governor Kemp in his decision to support school vouchers. We know that school vouchers specifically are very bad for low-income communities. As an advocate of low-income immigrant students in coastal Georgia, we can see how school vouchers will not help them. For example, we know that private schools are more expensive than to start off, we know that private schools are more expensive than the vouchers can provide. And school vouchers also disproportionately affect ESOL students and students with disability because they do not have the same standards. ESOL students will not have access to the same resources and they will potentially be exposed to racism and discrimination. Right now, I have a perfect example, like one example that we are seeing in the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System. So there is a school program coming up for ESOL students. So students who need resources or who need more support to learn English, they will benefit from having access to this program. However, in order for these students to be able to enroll into this summer class program, they will have to pay $50. One thing is clear, students need to learn English in order to pass their exams in public school. However, they have to pay $50 in order to have access to this. It is a necessity that students learn English in order to pass their exams, but they have to pay $50. However, it is not a necessity that students get a $600 voucher in order to have access to private education. So this, if you do the math, $600 right now could be a scholarship for so many English as a second language students because the program is $50 and many other parents are not able to pay for it. So with the school voucher, we know that Georgia immigrant students will not benefit from it. Right now, as we speak, ESOL programs in rural communities are heavily underfunded. With the communities that we work with, they oftentimes struggle because they don't have access to someone to translate for them. There are ESOL teachers that have way more students that they should have. They cannot keep up with the students. That is an issue. Funding should be allocated for more resources for ESOL families, but that is not happening. So today, I want to make a call to action to everyone who's watching right now to take action, because school vouchers, no matter what they tell you, they don't benefit Georgia families, and especially multicultural families and immigrant children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Our next speaker is Heather Scalziti. Heather is the legislative chair for the Georgia PTA. She's also a public school parent, and will be speaking for Georgia PTA today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on the call. I appreciate it. Georgia PTA opposes any vouchers. Really, this is very disheartening that this has happened, diverting public funds in order to fund private schools. Also, I think, several topics that were brought up were the fact that it's discriminatory, that it does not allow accessibility for all students. Again, we were not able to even get a single vote on factoring in the poverty weight. We're one of 6 states in the country that does not factor taking students that are underprivileged and providing them resources. The $200 million that have now been diverted as a result of this bill definitely could have went to wraparound services. Our Georgia students are also facing mental health crisis, which isn't being addressed. We talked about also, the need for providing additional professional development. The professional development, even around something as simple as mental health, is not occurring in our school system currently. We talked a little bit about the fact that, school nutrition has also been underfunded. And while we were able to receive only $6 million for funding for healthy lunches for Georgia during this legislative session, we've been advocating for over 60 years. And we know that having accessibility to a healthy meal helps stimulate the brain, and providing students with the ability to be able to function. And on top of that, we also have a new literacy law that's put into place. Talked a little bit about maybe what the intentions are behind the voucher. So we have a literacy law that's been put into place, and now a voucher to divert students away from the school system. And not only that, have the impact that it affects rural Georgia. There are not enough schools, even private schools, to be able to accommodate the students that are in these low performing, schools, because the facilities aren't even there. So really, what is the intention? What is the goal, the end result, and who's affected? And it's that we are taxpayers, right? Because we're the ones working every day. We're parents who aren't even able to step away and have a voice, because we're working, not able to take the time off of work often, to attend the hearings. And if we are, such as, what's happened now, our voice isn't heard, the voice of the constituents. And that is what's most alarming, is that students are going to suffer. We've diverted funds and resources away from our families, away from our teachers, and left a certain demographic of students completely vulnerable, without resources or any care for their future. So that's the position of Georgia PTA. Thank you for having us, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to just work together and align on what families and parents and teachers collectively want to see, and be able to get those results with our representatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. Our last speaker is another student. Blake Robinson is a Lowndes County Public School graduate. He is also a senior, is that right, at Georgia Southern University. Thank you so much, Blake.
Yes, thank you so much, Michaela, and thank you to everyone, not only for speaking on this today, but also just for being here. I will say I did watch as Governor Kemp put his signature on SB 233 today, and I just want to start by mentioning something that he said. He said that the bill works to give teachers a pay raise based on poverty levels and income. And I said, Aren't we doing that already as a state? Aren't we already providing funding to our teachers? Aren't we we're providing that funding, but what about for the students? What about directing that funding to the students who need it the most? Because funding those students specifically is exactly what we need to do instead, because the opportunity weight has already been mentioned here. And I just want to make sure that we understand that that's something that we can do in this state, and we're not doing it. And so to start here, I just want to kind of highlight from my perspective, not only as a student but also as an advocate, how I've seen this bill. So to start, the original bill called for taking that funding and applying that funding only to the bottom 5%, and then it increased to the bottom 25%, because guess what? They realized they couldn't pay for it unless they got it from that bottom 25%, and they're still not going to be able to pay for it. And the other thing too is that students on this voucher program aren't able to receive any other financial aid. So if you take this $6,500 voucher, you can get no other financial aid to that private school that you attend. So if your private school costs $1,200 or $12,000 a year, and you take that $6,500, and maybe that applies to your tuition or your travel costs or your books, you can't take any more funding. So where are the people that are supposedly going to benefit from this? Where are they going to find that extra $6,500? Because I'll tell you, if they're applying for this, it's because they don't have it, or it's because they already have it. But now I want to talk a little bit more about the rural perspective. So Lowndes County, we are a rural county. We're in about as far south in Georgia as you can go, down in Valdosta, if any of y'all know where that is. And in South Georgia, I'll tell you, I've driven through. I have friends in these counties. I mean, Georgia Southern University is in one of these counties. Bullitt County, we have schools in that bottom 25%. I've looked on the list, and we've got them. And I mean, I can tell you, we don't get enough resources, and we don't have as much access to resources as some of the metropolitan schools have. Like even in Savannah, Chatham County, they have great resources there. And I mean, even in the Metro Atlanta areas, they have great resources there, but we don't have that kind of stuff. We don't have those kinds of tax bases here, because that's just how rural communities are. I mean, just think about this. Without the 12 Metro Atlanta counties, Georgia would rank in the bottom 10 states in the country for educational attainment. And just as a reference, right now we currently rank 35th. We are considered one of the worst in the country. And so I just want us to really think about that. Because, when we're divesting from these public schools, especially these rural public schools, we're divesting from the backbone of the community. Because I'll tell you, when I was in Lowndes County Public Schools, I'll never forget this. We were a football town. Every public school, every public high school in these rural communities is the center of the community. It's where your teachers, it's where your students and your football players, it's where your coaches, all of that, they all come together on that Friday night in fall, and it's a place of community. And without the funding that we get as schools from the state, some of these places of community may go away. Because I mean, most of these rural football programs are funded by boosters. There's some funding from the state, but it's mostly boosters. And some of these programs are struggling. And so when you take that funding away from the school that has to pay for the cost of the facilities, to keep up the costs of paying the coaches, and paying the workers in general, the people that keep these schools alive, you're going to start seeing some of these public schools, I mean, even close. We may see the closing of some of our public schools. And I'm not talking about just high schools. I'm talking about our elementary schools and our middle schools are going to start closing, because they're not going to be getting enough funding. They're going to be getting the local tax dollars and the federal dollars, but they're not going to be getting those state dollars. That bottom 25% isn't getting those state dollars anymore, because that's what they're talking about. And so I just want to really let everyone hear that, is that we're going to only be getting, and remember this, our public schools in the bottom 25% are only going to be getting federal dollars and local tax dollars. So as I said, when you have counties that have a lower tax base than other counties, you're going to get less income from local taxes, or that local tax burden is going to be more on your local communities. And not everybody can afford that. As a matter of fact, in most local communities, they can't afford that. And yet the state's saying, you know what, you've got to afford that. And then let's talk about the federal dollars. Most of the people that advocated for this bill are people that will gladly tell you that they want the federal government out of the work that we do here at the state level. And yet they're saying, but we're going to pull the state funding, and now you have to rely on the federal and local funding. And so beyond that, let's just think about how unpopular these are. 76.1% of Georgians support allowing additional funds for students living in poverty, while 2/3 oppose private school vouchers. That 2/3 sounds like a majority against, but you know, what do I know about electoral math? I'm not a legislator. But I just want to also highlight these are my final 2 points here, is that first of all, 50 Georgia counties don't even have a private school, and mind you, we have 159 counties in the state. We have too many. But 38 of those counties are rural counties, which means that, as I said, rural communities are going to end up footing the bill for the private schools that are in Metro Atlanta. So we only have 38, we have 38 of those counties that don't even have a private school, that a lot of these legislators that fought for it are representing, and yet this is what they're doing. They're not representing these counties. And so the last thing I'll say is that I just want to kind of leave on a note of, let's look at the future, what this is going to do to us as a state. And I mean, the perfect case study is what's going on in Arizona right now. Now, Arizona, they have a universal school voucher program. And that program actually started out similar to ours. It was a selective voucher program, and then it expanded into a universal voucher program. And as of this year, that program costs Arizona taxpayers $900 million a year. $900 million that we could be putting towards programs that actually benefit students and don't hurt them. So as a young person and as a public school graduate and somebody who plans to even attend public law school, I will tell, and we only have 2 in this state, by the way. But as a public school advocate, hard public school advocate, I will tell you that seeing stuff like this happen, it makes me, I'll tell you, it makes me sick, because I believe that our state is a state that can do better. I believe that our legislators can do better, and I believe that our governor can do better. Thank you.
Blake, thank you so much. And I hope that emphasizes for folks, we have not given up. We recognize that education is at an inflection point, not just in Georgia, but across the country. We are, all these folks here, as well as many of our partners who are in the audience who are not speaking today, are going to continue to advocate for investment in our public school system and demanding transparency and accountability for these privatization programs. We have learned lessons in our neighboring states, even closer than Arizona. Florida has had a similar experience. We've also seen states who have chosen to reject privatization efforts and instead make long-term commitments to their public school systems, and are seeing incredible academic and economic returns. So we will continue, as Blake said, to call on our leaders to truly put their money where their mouth is and set the standard for bold leadership in public education funding, ensuring lasting impacts for our young people and generations to come. I do want to take a second. If there are questions for any of our speakers today, feel free to ask them now. You can come off of mute, or you can put them in the chat, and we will try to distribute them based on who is asking and who's the target audience is. Thank you. Terrence, go ahead.
Michaela, can you speak a little bit about the part of the voucher? Blake mentioned that, in other states, this would be the precursor to a universal voucher. Can you talk about what's in the bill that might actually make it more broad with regard to the income level? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think both Tracy and Blake hit on this. So our ESA program, our Educational Savings Account program, this Promise Scholarship in SB 233 is not what people would consider universal because it has certain guardrails for access of who can use this program to start. One of those guardrails is the 400% federal income, or 400% of the federal poverty rate income cap. But what I think is a little misleading about that and has been marketed as targeting folks who are living in poverty is one, that 400% of the federal income poverty level is still over $100,000 a year. Tracy did a great job of emphasizing that. But what is also not emphasized about how this bill was written is that that threshold only activates until all of the students who are under that level have been assessed. So that means that if as we talked about, students who might otherwise qualify for the bill or qualify for the program cannot afford the additional costs of the private school of sending their child to private school, and thus do not end up using the program. The program then is accessible to anyone, regardless of their family's income level. So while it is kind of an initial trigger, it is not a limiting factor by any means. Those dollars will be spent regardless of whether or not the originally eligible students are allowed to use it. I also want to highlight that students, regardless of their income level, who are in kindergarten, do not have to attend a public school in order to qualify. One of the other admission guardrails, I just will say guardrails. One of the other admission guardrails is a requirement that a student has to attend public school in a qualifying attendance zone for the prior to attendance counts. So that's the prior 2 semesters here in Georgia. That means a whole year in public school before they can leverage the voucher program. That does not apply to kindergarten students. Someone who is planning to send their child to private kindergarten can automatically qualify for the voucher. And then in following years, students who have qualified previously for the voucher are given priority for the next year's distribution of funds, meaning that you could have a student who starts kindergarten in private school who never sets foot in a public school and receives targeted priority for private school funding every single year on year, as they proceed through their education. If there are no other questions, I'd really encourage folks, if you would like to reach out to individual members, we're happy to distribute contact information. The point of contact is Thomas Marshall, who's listed on the media advisory. Otherwise, we thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for willing to speak and share your perspectives and thoughts and your continued advocacy for our public schools. We will be in touch as we continue advocating for our school systems here in Georgia. Thank you.